In 23 years of doing this work, I have learned that the ones who fight you are never the ones you need to worry about. A spirit that screams, that throws furniture, that makes a child's voice drop 3 octaves and spit insults in a language they've never studied. That's a spirit that wants to stay, and wanting to stay means it can be made to leave. The ones you should be afraid of are the ones that go quietly. I didn't fully understand that lesson until 3 years ago in a house outside Tulsa, in a case that ended the way every other case of mine had ended, and still keeps me up more nights than any of the ones that didn't. I should say, before anything else, that I don't advertise. Word travels through a narrow, particular network. People who've been helped once and quietly pass a name along to someone else desperate enough to try it. That's how Diane found me. She called on a Tuesday, calm in a way I initially took for strength, and told me her daughter Emery, 11 years old, had stopped being herself sometime that spring. Not dramatically. No violence, no screaming fits, nothing you'd see in a movie. Just an absence, Diane said. Like something had quietly stepped into the space where her daughter used to be and hadn't bothered announcing itself. I get a version of that call more often than you'd think. And most of the time, it resolves into something mundane. Depression, trauma, a diagnosis a doctor eventually catches. I always ask questions first, careful ones, and Diane's answers were textbook enough that I nearly referred her to a therapist instead of coming out myself. What changed my mind was one detail she mentioned almost as an aside, that Emery had started speaking a handful of words in a language Diane didn't recognize, always at night, always in her sleep, and that a family friend who happened to speak Aramaic had gone pale and left the house without explanation after hearing 2 sentences. I drove out the following week. The house was ordinary in a way that almost worked against my instincts. Clean, warm, full of the specific clutter of a family that loves each other, school photos on the stairwell wall, a dog that greeted me at the door with its whole body wagging. Diane led me through it like she'd rehearsed the tour, which struck me as slightly odd only in retrospect. And I want to be honest that in the moment I read it as nerves rather than anything more deliberate. I asked, as I always do, if there was any history in the family worth knowing about. Illness, addiction, old tragedy, anything that might explain an opening. Diane mentioned lightly that her grandmother had been into some old folk practices back in the old country. The kind of offhand phrase families use to describe something they've never fully examined. I made a note to ask more later. I never got the chance, or rather I let the evening's momentum carry me past the moment where I should have insisted. What I noticed immediately, and what should have told me more than it did, was that the room she'd prepared for me was already set up almost exactly the way I would have set it up myself. Salt laid in a rough boundary along the floor, not perfectly, but close. Close enough that whoever had done it had clearly done some reading. A single chair positioned at the center, facing north, which is a detail I've never once put on any website or pamphlet. Something I only ever explain out loud, in person, to the families I'm actively working with. I asked Diane where she'd learned to prepare a room like that. She said she'd found some old notes, a journal that had belonged to her grandmother, and had simply followed what was written. I let it go. I've learned that families under this kind of stress often assemble knowledge from strange, half-remembered places. And I didn't want to spend the first hour interrogating a grieving mother about her grandmother's diary. Emery was brought in and sat in the chair. She was small for 11, quiet, her eyes moving around the room in a way that read, to me, as simple anxiety. I began the way I always begin, slow, low, giving whatever was present a chance to identify itself before I did anything more direct. It answered almost immediately. That alone was unusual. Most of what I deal with resists that first invitation. Makes me work for every inch, every syllable. This one spoke through Emery's mouth in a voice pitched slightly lower than a child's. Calm, almost courteous, and told me its name. or a name close enough to true that I could work with it, and said, without any prompting from me at all, that it was ready to leave. I want you to understand how rare that is. In over 2 decades, I could count on one hand the number of times something has offered itself up without a fight. My instinct, the one I've trusted through every case before this one, told me this was good news. A cooperative spirit meant a fast, clean resolution. No risk to the child, no danger to me. I proceeded, and as I did, something small kept happening that I let myself explain away. One small dismissal at a time, the way you do when you badly want a hard night to be an easy one. Emery's hand, resting on the arm of the chair, would occasionally flex and curl in a specific, repeating pattern, 3 fingers folding down, one extending over and over like a code I didn't have the key to. I told myself it was residual nervous energy, the body's leftover static during a possession. Her eyes, too, kept flicking toward Diane standing in the doorway, quick darting glances that didn't match the drowsy, distant expression on the rest of her face. I told myself that was fear, a child's fear of her mother watching something so strange happen to her. There was a moment, maybe 40 minutes in, where Emery's mouth moved without the deeper voice attached to it. Just her own small voice, cracked and fast, saying something I couldn't fully catch, 2 or 3 words at most, before the lower voice rolled back over it like a wave closing over a stone. I paused. I asked her directly if she was all right. The lower voice answered for her, pleasant, patient, assuring me everything was proceeding exactly as it should. I've replayed that moment more than any other since. I had every tool in front of me to stop and ask harder questions. I chose to trust the process instead, because the process was going by every external measure I'd ever used to judge these things, beautifully. 23 years of pattern recognition told me a smooth session was a safe one, and I have never before had reason to question that assumption strongly enough to stop mid-ritual and start over from nothing. The ritual moved into its final stage close to midnight. This is the part where, in every other case I've handled, there is resistance, a last surge of whatever's present trying to root itself deeper before it's forced out. There was none of that here. If anything, I felt the presence in the room lean into the closing words, matching my rhythm instead of fighting it, and some cold. Small part of my mind noted that detail and filed it as wrong, even as the rest of me pushed forward toward what felt, at the time, like an unusually clean success. I said the final line. The salt boundary on the floor, undisturbed the entire session, suddenly scattered outward in a perfect ring, like something had exhaled hard enough to move it without touching it. Emery's body went slack in the chair, her chin dropping to her chest, and for one long moment the room was completely, totally silent. Then Diane exhaled a long, satisfied breath I heard from across the room, and said so quietly I almost missed it. Not to me, not to her daughter, but to the empty air beside her. "Thank you. She's ready now." I looked at her. She wasn't looking at Emery. She was looking at the space just past my shoulder, and her expression wasn't relief. It was something closer to completion. The look of someone finishing a transaction they'd been waiting years to close. I understood, all at once and far too late, exactly what those small signals from Emery had been trying to tell me the entire session. The presence hadn't been trapped inside her. It had been guarding her, keeping something worse at bay, and my ritual hadn't removed anything at all. It had broken the one seal holding a door shut, and whatever had been waiting patiently on the other side of that door for years, invited in by a grandmother's notes and kept fed quietly, by a daughter who'd learned exactly how to stage a room for a stranger who wouldn't ask the right questions, was now free to finish whatever arrangement it had made with this family a very long time before I ever arrived. Emery lifted her head. Her eyes were open, and they were her own eyes, ordinary brown, a child's eyes. But she looked at me with an expression no 11-year-old has ever worn in front of me before or since. Patient in a way children simply aren't, and she smiled small and polite, exactly the way her mother had. I left that house within the hour, and I have not taken a case since without spending days on background alone, checking every family history I can find, cross-referencing anything that even resembles a family journal or an old ritual practice passed down through a bloodline. I still don't know exactly what I let out of that house or what I sealed inside that little girl in its place. I only know that Diane never called me again to say anything had gone wrong, and in this work, more than almost anything else, silence like that has never once meant good news. My neighbor Carla called me at 9 at night and asked if I could come over for an hour. Not urgent sounding, not panicked, just tired in the specific way parents get tired when something's been going on too long for them to explain it properly anymore. I said sure, mostly because she'd fed my cat for 2 weeks that summer I was in the hospital. And you don't say no to someone after that, whatever they're asking. What she was actually asking, once I got there, was harder to say no to gracefully. Her son Dylan, 12 years old, had changed over the past 2 months in a way she couldn't get any doctor to take seriously. Not moody, not withdrawn in the ordinary teenage way. Different. He'd stopped sleeping through the night, stopped eating with the family, started talking to himself in a low, even voice that didn't sound like a kid working through anxiety, more like someone rehearsing lines. 3 pediatricians and 1 child psychiatrist later, with nothing on paper worse than adjustment concerns, Carla had done what plenty of desperate, exhausted parents eventually do. She'd found someone through a friend of a friend, a woman who did, in Carla's careful phrasing, spiritual work. I want to be upfront that I thought this whole thing was going to be theater. Sage smoke and a soothing voice, and some vague talk about energy. The kind of thing that makes anxious parents feel like they've done something, even if nothing changes. I've never believed in anything I couldn't test twice, and get the same result both times. I told Carla this, gently, and she nodded like she'd expected it, and then she said the part that actually got me to stay. She asked for someone in the room who doesn't believe in any of it. She was specific, said it has to be someone who won't want to see anything. I laughed, honestly, at how strange that request was. But Carla wasn't laughing, and Dylan was upstairs, not sleeping again, so I said fine. I'd sit in the corner and be the skeptic they apparently needed. The woman arrived a little after 10. She introduced herself only as Ren. No last name offered, mid-50s maybe. Dressed like she'd come from a normal Tuesday at any normal job. Nothing about her performative or costumed the way I'd braced for. She looked at me for a long moment when Carla introduced me, longer than felt casual, like she was checking something off a list rather than just being polite. They cleared the living room. Furniture pushed back against the walls. Rug rolled up and leaned in the corner, a single lamp left on across the room. Everything else dark. Dylan was brought down and sat in a dining chair set in the middle of the cleared floor. Wrists loosely tied to the armrests with soft cloth. Not tight, more like a precaution against him falling than any kind of restraint. He didn't fight it. He sat with his chin down, breathing slow and even. And something about that evenness bothered me before I could articulate why. It was too regular. Not the breath of a nervous kid. The breath of something counting. Ren knelt in front of him and started speaking low. Words I couldn't fully make out, not in a language I recognized. And I remember thinking, clinically, that this was exactly the kind of thing I expected. Repetitive, hypnotic, designed to make everyone in the room feel like something significant was happening, whether or not it was. Then she looked over her shoulder at me. Stay with your eyes on him. Whatever you see, don't look away and don't believe any of it. That part matters more than you think. I almost asked why my disbelief was apparently load-bearing to whatever she was doing. But the room had gone quiet in a way that made questions feel wrong to ask out loud. So I just nodded and kept watching. For the first 20 minutes, nothing happened that I couldn't explain. Dylan's breathing stayed even. Ren's chanting rose and fell. Carla stood by the doorway with her arms wrapped around herself. And I sat in my corner chair, thinking about how I was going to describe this to my sister tomorrow. Something about how sad it was that people this desperate would pay for something with no mechanism behind it at all. I let my eyes wander around the room while I waited. The way you do when you've decided nothing important is going to happen. The framed family photos on the wall behind Dylan, ordinary school pictures and beach vacations looked the way they always did when I'd been over for dinner. The television across the room was off, but the little standby light beside the power button kept flickering at an interval that didn't match anything I associated with electronics. On for a half second, off for two, on again, a rhythm with no obvious cause. I noticed too that the kitchen clock, which ticked loud enough to hear from the living room every other time I'd visited this house, had gone completely silent, not stopped, because the second hand was still moving when I checked, just soundless. Like something had reached in and muted it specifically. I told myself all of it was nothing. Old wiring. An unfamiliar house at an unfamiliar hour making my nerves do what nerves do. Somewhere around the half-hour mark, the room's temperature dropped enough that I noticed it in my hands first. A chill that didn't match the space heater humming in the corner. Dylan's chin was still down. His chest was still moving, but it had stopped sinking with his shoulders, like his ribs were rising a half second behind the rest of him. A leg so small, I told myself I was imagining it out of sheer exhaustion. I want to describe what happened next carefully, because I've gone over it enough times that I'm confident in the order, even if I'm not confident in the explanation. Dylan's chest stopped moving entirely, not slowed. Stopped. For 4, maybe 5 seconds. No rise, no fall, and Carla made a sound behind me that I still think about. A short, broken breath that she swallowed almost as fast as it came out. Ren didn't react. She kept chanting, low and steady, like this was the expected shape of the ritual, rather than a medical emergency happening 6 feet in front of her. That's when I heard my name. Not from Dylan, from directly behind me, close enough that I felt breath against the back of my neck. And the voice used my full first name, the one almost nobody uses, the one that isn't on any of my social accounts or my email signature or anything Carla would have reason to know either. A whisper, patient, almost fond, like it had been waiting a long time to finally say it out loud. I didn't turn around. I couldn't, not immediately. My whole body locked in place, the way it does in the half second after you realize you've grabbed something hot before the pain actually arrives. When I finally did turn, there was nothing behind me except the dark hallway leading to the kitchen. Empty, ordinary, a coat rack and a pair of shoes by the door. Ren stopped chanting, and for the first time all night, she wasn't looking at Dylan. She was looking at me, directly, with an expression I can only describe as recognition. The look you give something you've been waiting on and it's finally arrived. Behind her, the living room window reflected the room back at us in the dark glass, the way windows do at night. And in that reflection I watched Ren tilt her head, except the reflection tilted a half second after she did. A small, wrong little delay that no glass should ever produce. And once I'd seen it, I couldn't stop seeing it. My own reflected hand lifting to my face, a beat behind my actual hand every single time I tested it. Dylan's head came up. His eyes were his own. Ordinary, tired 12-year-old eyes, nothing wrong with them at all, which somehow made what came out of his mouth worse. His voice when he spoke wasn't a child's voice. It was low, unhurried, carrying a rhythm that belonged to someone decades older, and it was aimed directly at me, not at Ren, not at his mother. "You misunderstood the room," he said. "This was never about him. It only needed one door open in here tonight, and it's harder to open the ones that already believe. So it needed you. And you've been standing here refusing to believe in anything the entire time, which is exactly how the door gets left unlocked." Then his eyes dropped. His shoulders slumped, and his breathing synced back into a normal, ordinary, exhausted rhythm, like something had simply stood up and walked out of him. Carla ran to him. Ren sat back on her heels, quiet now, watching me with something that might have been pity. Dylan was fine within the hour, back to himself, hungry, sheepish, embarrassed by the fuss, remembering none of it. Carla cried. Thanked Ren more times than either of them could count. Thanked me too, though she couldn't have known what she was actually thanking me for. I drove home a little after 1 in the morning. I checked my rear view mirror at every red light the whole way, and every single time for just a fraction of a second. Whatever was behind me in that mirror seemed to be moving a beat slower than it should. Dylan's been fine for months now. Carla's grateful, and she stopped asking me to explain what I saw that night, mostly because I've never given her a straight answer. I still catch my reflection lagging sometimes, in dark windows, in my bathroom mirror at the worst hour of the night. And every so often, always in that same low, patient whisper, I hear my name spoken in a voice that isn't mine, coming from somewhere just behind, wherever I happen to be standing. I've stopped turning around to check. So far, that's worked out fine. I never thought I'd hear a story stranger than my own night in that living room, until I came across an account from someone on the other side of this kind of work entirely. Someone who spends her life being called in to do what Ren did for Dylan. Her closest call didn't happen because a spirit fought her. It happened because one didn't.